The aim of this landscape study is to create a painting from two different source images and to study the form and structure of trees as they reflect into water. The composition is founded upon this black and white image, whereas the color for the composition will be founded upon a different image. In the first stage of the painting, a tonal study is created based upon the black and white image. Let's take a look at it a bit more closely. In order to paint a subject, I have to be able to simplify it down into a few compositional elements. This becomes the foundation upon which I will construct the subject. The more complex a composition becomes, the more important it is to try to discern the underlying structure. I'm searching for the contours of the large shapes, the trees, the hills, and the sky. The initial drawing is based upon these observations. Using acrylic paint and a wet palette, I mix out several tones of burnt sienna lightened with white. In the first stage of the painting, I lay in the simplified shapes. The paint is not thinned with medium or water to ensure a clean, solid field of color. My focus is on the tonal structure. The tones represent the foreground trees, middle ground hills, and background sky. These three elements are also mirrored down into the water. The trees are rendered by focusing on the rhythm and shape of the masses of foliage. Although all of the details are not always visible when working from a photo, there is enough information that I can interpret the forms. Looking at the photo, notice how the foliage masses cascade down to the left and right of the tree. Notice also how they arch down around the trunks. There's nothing random about their placement. Foliage masses and tree trunks should be working together to create a unified, formal whole. It should all make sense. The dark tones are first added, and then middle tones to soften the transition from dark to light. Finally, these sharp and simple geometric shapes are modified to look more natural. These steps are repeated for the reflections in the water. The middle ground hills, which are covered with trees, are now modeled. The tones are lighter than those of the foreground trees in order to create a sense of depth and distance. Once again, I'm interpreting the rhythm and movement of what I observe in the source image and changing it to work with the composition. The effect of the water ripples are now added. This is done by adding horizontal brush strokes. The tones for the water are based upon those that were used in the land and sky portion of the underpainting. The color photo was chosen because of some obvious similarities, such as the time of day, the trees, hills, and water reflections. In order to apply the colors that I see in the photo to the painting, I have to consider how they are structured. The foreground trees are bluish-green with cool blue shadows. These colors are repeated in the hills. As the hills fade into the distance, they get progressively lighter and more blue. The early morning sky still has a pinkish glow to it. Blue is the dominant color in the composition. The other colors are mixed in relation to it. The violet cast of the blue relative to the green leads me to choose ultramarine blue. On my palette, I also have phthalo green, cadmium red light, and cadmium yellow light. Starting with the sky, I mix out a very pale tone of ultramarine blue and one with cadmium red light. These two are mixed together to get an intermediate color, which is then laid into the sky. By using a wet palette, I'm able to keep my color mixes moist. This is a useful way to maintain a consistent relative tonal structure throughout the painting process. It enables me to avoid the difficulties of tonal shifts that occurs when acrylic paint dries. The colors are mixed side by side on the palette in the same way that they will appear on the painting. Unlike the underpainting, I'm working from the background toward the foreground. Basic tones and colors are laid in one area at a time. Particular attention is paid to the relationship of one part to another. The hills are rendered with ultramarine blue and phthalo green. The more distant hills are lighter in tone. Notice that these tones are chosen in relation to the sky. The blue-green of the trees is a mix of phthalo green and ultramarine blue. The shadows have more ultramarine in them. The lights of the trees have more white in them and a touch of cadmium yellow light. I start the trees by first laying in middle tones, and then I add the dark and light tones. Each mass of foliage is laid down in relation to the one that is neighboring it. This is the best way to control the tonal relationship of the parts and the whole. Once I've put down the colors for the land and sky, I can move on to the water reflections. The colors are the same as those used in the sky, hills, and trees. The horizontal brush strokes used in the last stage of the underpainting are repeated and reinforced. Since I'm working in acrylic, I will repaint the different areas several times in order to strengthen the colors and shapes. It is important to take a step back from the painting and let it dry in order to judge the tonal structure and determine whether to lighten or darken the different colors. I now go back and refine the masses of foliage. The simplified forms are broken down with uneven edges to give a greater sense of naturalism. The colors are refined and reinforced. The tree trunks and branches are placed in order to support the masses of foliage. I allow the branches to weave in front and behind the foliage. This gives a greater sense of depth and dimension to the trees. The last trees to the right are added once I feel that I will no longer have to alter the background and middle ground. After they are laid in, their forms are mirrored in the water below.